Get comfortable. Loosen whatever is still tight. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears, and let the room around you go quiet and unimportant for a while. Tonight we are going somewhere warm, and somewhere loud, and somewhere almost nobody makes videos about, because it was not beautiful, and it was not romantic, and nobody in it had a title worth engraving on anything. We are going into a Victorian laundry. Not a laundry room in a great country house, with its scrubbed deal tables and its housekeeper's inventory, though we will visit one of those before the night is out, for comparison. We are going into a much smaller place. A back kitchen in a London suburb, with a copper boiler built into the corner and a yard behind it barely wide enough to swing a wet sheet. And you are not going to watch from the doorway. You are going to be the woman who runs it. Here is the image most of us carry, and it is worth naming before we set it down. A row of white sheets on a line, snapping in clean country air. A hedge, a green field beyond. A woman with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, and her forearms bare and pink, smiling into a low sun, pegging out something that is already somehow spotless. Everything smells of grass and fresh air. It is the picture on the biscuit tin. It is the picture in the costume drama, held for 4 seconds while somebody delivers a line about the weather. That picture is not a lie exactly. Sheets did hang on lines. Air did dry them. But it is the last 3 seconds of a process that took 2.5 days, and it removes every part of that process that was heavy, hot, corrosive, and skilled. It is a bit like photographing the last brushstroke on a portrait and calling that painting. So let me tell you what the picture leaves out, because this is the whole reason we are here. Laundry, in the 1870s, was the heaviest single piece of work done in an ordinary household, heavier than cooking, heavier than cleaning, heavier, by most accounts of the people who did all three, than anything else in the domestic week. It involved fire, kept alive for hours. It involved water, carried by hand, in quantities that are genuinely difficult to imagine, until you do the arithmetic, which we will. It involved boiling, in a vessel large enough to take 12 sheets, standing waist-high, filled and emptied by human arms. It involved a working knowledge of alkalis and acids and bleaching agents that would today sit in a chemistry syllabus, learned entirely by hand, entirely by mother to daughter, and written down almost nowhere. And it involved judgment, constant, unforgiving judgment. What temperature will set a stain rather than lift it? How long a linen shirt can sit in the boil before the fibers begin to give? How much blue to add to the rinse so a white looks whiter? And at what point the same blue turns a collar, the color of a bruise? Which soap for greasy kitchen cloths, and which for a lady's fine cotton? And what happens if you confuse them? A laundress who got these wrong did not simply do a poor job. She destroyed goods that cost more than she earned in a fortnight, and she paid for them. That is the second thing the biscuit tin leaves out. This work carried financial risk. A woman taking in washing was handling other people's property, and the property was often the single most valuable movable thing those people owned. Not the furniture, the linen. We will spend real time on this later, on what a set of sheets cost, and why households counted them, and why a housemaid was sent to the door with a written list. Because once you understand the value of the cloth, you understand the tension in the room. And the third thing, the one that matters most for tonight, this work was almost entirely done by women. Not incidentally, not mostly, almost entirely. Men appeared at the edges of the trade, driving carts, owning the larger premises, selling the soap and the soda, and renting out the machinery, the wet work, the hot work, the skilled finishing work. The hours between 4 in the morning and 8 at night belonged to women, and it belonged to them across every class in the country. The difference between a duchess's household and a dock labourer's household was not whether women did the laundry. It was how many of them, and whether they were paid, and whether anyone ever said their names aloud. So that is our thesis for tonight, and I want to state it plainly before we begin, so that everything that follows has something to hang from. Laundry was the hottest, heaviest, most chemically complex, most financially exposed work in the Victorian home. It required a skill set that took years to acquire. It was performed overwhelmingly by women, and it was classified by the people who wrote the wage surveys and the census categories and the household manuals as unskilled. We are going to spend the next couple of hours taking that classification apart, slowly, one tub at a time. Before we go, one small thing. If you find these long, quiet histories useful for falling asleep, do subscribe. It genuinely helps other people find them. And if you are still awake at the end, or if you wake up somewhere in the middle of the ironing, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you are and what time it is where you are. I like reading those. There is something companionable about a channel where half the audience is at 2 in the morning and the other half is on a train. Right. Let the room go soft. Let the light go down. We are going back. It is 1878. The month is March, which matters more than you might expect, because in March the drying is unreliable, and every laundress in England is watching the sky the way a farmer watches it. The place is a suburb south of the river in London. Not a slum, and not respectable in the way the people 3 streets over would use the word, but somewhere in between, in the wide grey middle, where most of the city actually lived. Terraces of brick, 2 rooms up and 2 down, built quickly in the last 30 years, for people who work with their hands and are anxious about the fact. A street of them, running down toward a road with a butcher, a baker, a pawnbroker, a public house on the corner, and a chapel with a tin roof. It is Monday, and it is not yet dawn. The first thing to arrive is the smell, because the smell arrives before the light does. Washing soda, which is sharp and faintly mineral, and sits at the back of the throat. Wet stone, from the flags of the yard that never fully dry between 1 week and the next. Coal smoke, everywhere, the great constant background note of the century, from your own fire and from 100,000 others. And underneath all of it, faint but always present in a laundry house, the smell of yellow soap, which is not the soap, you know. It is hard. It is the colour of old butter. It is cut with a knife rather than squeezed from anything, and it smells like tallow and lye, because that is what it is. The second thing is the temperature. The back kitchen is cold at this hour, cold enough that your breath shows, because the fire has been out since 10 last night. But it will not be cold for long. By 7 this morning, this room will be the warmest place in the street, warm enough that the windows run with water and the plaster stays damp until Thursday. You will spend the day moving between a fire that is too hot to stand beside and a yard that is too cold to stand in. And you will do that for 14 hours, and by Wednesday, you will not particularly notice it. The third thing is the sound, or rather the absence of it just now. A cart somewhere further off. A dog. The particular silence of a street where everybody sleeps in the same posture at the same hour, because they all have to be up at the same hour. In about 20 minutes, that silence will break, all along the terrace at once, as one back door after another opens, and one fire after another is lit, because Monday is wash day, and Monday is wash day for everyone. That is not a coincidence, and it is not tradition for its own sake. There are hard, practical reasons why the entire nation washed on the same day of the week, and we will get to them. For now, stand a moment in the dark of this back kitchen and let your eyes adjust. Against the far corner, built-in brick set with its own little grate underneath, sits the copper. It is the reason this house was chosen. It holds perhaps 20 gallons. It has a wooden lid, warped, and a hearth beneath it that takes kindling and small coal. Everything in the room is arranged around it, the way a kitchen is arranged around a stove, or a church around an altar. On the floor, 3 wooden tubs, staved and hooped like barrels cut down in descending sizes. A dolly peg leaning in the largest, which is a thing like a 3-legged stool on a broom handle, and which we will discuss at length, because it is one of the great unsung tools of domestic history. A washboard, a copper stick, bleached pale and soft at the end from years of boiling water, 2 flat irons and a box iron on a shelf, a great deal of rope. And by the door, waiting, stacked and tied and labelled, 6 bundles of other people's dirty linen. Those are yours. That is your week. Let us find out who you are. You are 34 years old. You were born in 1844, in a village in Kent that you have not seen in 11 years. And you came to London at 19 because there was work here and there was none there. You are married. Your husband is a carter for a coal merchant 3 streets over, and his wages are steady when the work is steady, which is to say from October to March they are very good, and from April to September they are thin enough that the household would not survive on them alone. That is the first thing to understand about you. You are not washing other people's linen because your husband has vanished or failed. You are washing it because a working family in this city, in this decade, requires more than 1 income to stay in 2 rooms with a copper, and yours is the second income. And in the lean half of the year, it is not the second income at all. It is the first. The 2 rooms cost you 5 shillings and 6pence a week. The rent is due on Monday morning, which is a small cruelty of timing that everyone in the terrace has simply absorbed, because Monday morning is the morning you have the least money and the most work in front of you. The landlord's man comes at 11. He knows better than to come earlier. Of the 2 rooms, the one you are standing in is the working room, and the one above is where you all sleep. 4 of you. Yourself, your husband, your eldest daughter who is 12, and your youngest who is 5. There were 2 more between them, who did not come through their second winters. And you do not talk about that, and neither will we, except to say that it is why the 5-year-old is watched with a particular closeness that the 12-year-old sometimes finds tiresome. Your eldest is the reason the business works. She is not a laundress yet, but she is the folder, the runner, the fetcher of small coal, the one who takes a message to a housemaid 3 streets away and comes back with the answer, and the answer to the question you forgot to ask. She goes to school 4 mornings a week, since the Elementary Education Act came in 1870, and the board school opened at the end of the road. She goes rather less on Mondays. This is an arrangement between you, the school, and your own conscience, and all 3 parties understand it perfectly. The copper, as we said, is why you took these rooms. It came with the house. Before it, in the first year, you boiled in a great iron pot on an open fire and lost most of the profit in coal, and most of the daylight in waiting. A built-in copper with its own grate underneath is the difference between taking in washing and having a trade. The mangle is different. The mangle you bought, it stands in the yard under a sheet of tarred canvas because there is no room for it indoors, and it cost you £2 12 shillings second-hand from a broker on the main road, paid at 1 shilling and 6pence a week over 35 weeks. You have 4 payments left. You know exactly how many, in the way that people who buy things on installments always know exactly how many, and you will know for the rest of your life what that machine cost you, long after you have forgotten what you paid for the bed. 6 households send you their washing. That is your entire trade, and it is a good trade, and it took you 6 years to build. There is a solicitor's clerk and his wife in a small villa off the main road, 4 in family, no servant but a girl who comes in daily. There is a widow with 2 grown sons in lodgings, who sends very little, but sends it every single week without fail, which matters more than volume. There is a schoolmaster with a large family and a horror of anything grey. There is a chemist whose wife counts everything twice. There is a household of 3 unmarried sisters who live on an annuity and whose linen is the oldest and finest you handle, some of it older than you are. And there is the one you would not lose for anything. A family in a proper double-fronted house with a housemaid and a cook and a nursemaid who send a bundle so large that it takes 2 of you to carry it in. None of these people are rich. Not one of them keeps a laundry-maid, which is the whole point. A great house does its own washing, in its own laundry, with its own women. It is the middling household that sends the linen out, the household with pretensions to whiteness and no room to make it. And there are thousands upon thousands of those. And that is the market you live in. You have never met 4 of the 6. You deal with the housemaids. Now, here is where we should stop and correct something, because it is the thing that almost everyone gets wrong about this work, and it was got wrong at the time as thoroughly as it is got wrong now. The washing of clothes was classified in the census, in the wage surveys, in the general assumption of the age, as unskilled labor, something a woman could fall back on, something requiring nothing but water, soap, and a strong pair of arms, the lowest rung of the ladder of women's work, below service, below the needle, a little above nothing at all. This is not true, and it was never true, and the people who said it had, without exception, never tried to get a wine stain out of a linen tablecloth. Consider what you have to know. You have to know fabrics. Not in general, but by touch, in the dark, wet, when a thing is half in the tub, and you cannot see the weave. Linen takes heat that cotton will take, and wool will not. Silk will not take soda at all. A garment dyed with the new aniline colors will bleed catastrophically in water your grandmother would have called merely warm. And those dyes are barely 20 years old. So this is knowledge you acquired by ruining things and paying for them. You have to know chemistry, and you know it the way a cook knows chemistry, which is to say practically, reliably, and without a single one of the words. You know that soda softens water and cuts grease, and will yellow wool. You know that lime bleaches, and will also eat holes in linen if you leave it. You know that an iron stain wants one treatment, and a grass stain wants another, and a scorch mark wants a prayer. You know that hard water wastes soap, and you know how much soda to put in the copper to correct it, in a district where the water is very hard indeed, and you arrived at that quantity by trial, and no one wrote it down. You have to know temperature without a thermometer. You judge boiling water by the sound before the sight. You judge an iron by holding it near your cheek, or by touching a wetted finger to the sole and listening. You have to know time. 6 households, each expecting their goods on the day promised, all of it moving through one copper and one pair of hands and a yard, with room for perhaps 40 feet of line. Every load is a bet placed on the weather 3 hours from now. And you have to be strong. This is not a small point, and it should not be a delicate one. A wet linen sheet weighs a great deal more than a dry one. A copper of water weighs about 200 pounds, and you did not carry it in one go, but you did carry it. You lift, wring, twist, and turn a mangle handle for the better part of 2 days a week, and you have the forearms and the shoulders to show for it. And there is no other trade open to a woman of your class that puts that kind of strength on public display. Unskilled, it is the most skilled work in the street, and it is called unskilled precisely because women do it, and because it is done in backyards, where no one who writes anything down can see it. Now, the shape of the week, because that governs everything. Monday is wash day. It is wash day because Sunday is the day the household is at home, and its dirty things come off, because a Sunday joint leaves cold meat that will feed the family on Monday without cooking, which frees the fire and the woman, and because starting on Monday leaves the rest of the week to recover if the weather turns against you. The whole country ran on this logic. When you hear every chimney on the terrace catch at the same hour, you are hearing a national calendar. Monday, then, is fire, water, soak, wash, and boil. It begins at 4 in the morning, and it ends when it ends, and you will be on your feet for the greater part of 18 hours, and it is the hardest day of the 7 by a distance so wide that nothing else is comparable. Tuesday is drying and starching, and Tuesday belongs entirely to the sky. If it is fine, you are out in the yard all day, with pegs in your mouth, and if it is wet, you are indoors with a horse in front of the fire and the smell of damp cloth in the room where your children sleep, and you are behind, and you will not catch up until Thursday. Wednesday is ironing. Wednesday is the skilled day, the day the money is actually made, because anyone can get a shirt clean, and rather few people can get a shirt front to that particular hard, glassy shine that a clerk's wife will pay extra for and complain about the absence of. Thursday is delivery and collection, which means walking, which means a basket on your hip, and 4 or 5 miles on the streets. And it also means being paid, or more often being told to come back. Friday is mending, airing, making up the bills, and the small washing for your own household, which comes last, always, in every laundress's week, and which is why your own family's linen is the greyest on the street. Saturday is the market and the arrears, whatever they may be. Sunday you go to chapel in the morning, and in the evening, after the light goes, you set the first tubs to soak, which is where we are now. The soaking has been done. The bundles are by the door. The copper is cold, and it will not be cold much longer. Pick up the kindling. The kindling is dry because you saw to it on Friday, and seeing to it on Friday is the difference between a fire that catches in 4 minutes and a fire that sulks for 20 while the whole day slides backward behind it. You lay it in the grate under the copper. Small stuff first, then the split wood, then the coal on top of that once the flame has taken. The copper is a great round-bellied thing of riveted iron set into brickwork in the corner of the back kitchen, and the brickwork around it is scorched black in a ring where 40 years of fires have licked past the door. It holds something like 20 gallons. When it is full and boiling, it is heavier than you are, several times over, and it cannot be moved. And everything you do today will be arranged around the fact that the water must come to it, rather than the other way about. It is 4 in the morning. There is no light in the sky at all, not even the grey suggestion of it. And there will be none for 2 hours yet. So you work by a candle stub set in a saucer on the shelf, and by the growing red of the fire itself. Which is the better of the 2 lights, and the cheaper? Now the water. Here is a thing that is very easy to slide past when you read about a Victorian wash day, because water is the most ordinary substance in the world, and it does not sound like a subject. But water is the whole of it. Water is the reason the day starts at 4 rather than 6. Water is the reason your shoulders are shaped the way they are. And in 1878, in a street of small houses in a London suburb, water does not come out of a tap in your kitchen whenever you want it. There is a standpipe in the court, shared between the houses. It runs on the company's schedule, which is not your schedule, and the schedule is not generous. Intermittent supply is the term the engineers use. What it means in practice is that the water is turned on for a few hours on certain days, and when it is on, everybody in the court who needs water needs it at the same moment, and when it is off, the pipe is a length of dead iron with a puddle under it. Some districts of London by this date have a constant supply. A great many do not, and the districts that do not are, with a consistency that stops being a coincidence somewhere around the 2nd or 3rd time you notice it, the districts where the poorer people live. So you store. Every laundress stores. There is a butt in the yard for rainwater, which is soft, and which you would use for everything if you could, because soft water lathers with half the soap that hard water needs, and soap is money. There are 2 zinc cisterns under the scullery bench that you filled yesterday evening while the supply was on, standing in the queue at the standpipe with the neighbour ahead of you, and the neighbour behind, and everybody a little short with everybody else, because a queue at a standpipe on a Sunday evening is a queue of women who all know exactly what tomorrow costs. Consider what is actually being carried here. A gallon of water weighs 10 pounds. A full bucket carries about 2 gallons. So a full bucket is 20 pounds. And you do not carry 1 bucket, you carry 2, 1 in each hand, because a woman with a bucket in each hand is balanced, and a woman with a bucket in one hand is wrenching her spine sideways with every step. That is 40 pounds a trip, from the standpipe in the court, across the uneven flags, in through the scullery door, and up over the lip of the copper, which is at the height of your ribs. A single wash day for 6 households' worth of linen will take you through something in the region of 80 to 100 gallons before you are finished. Boiling water for the copper, fresh water for the first rinse, fresh again for the second, fresh again for the third, because a rinse in dirty water is not a rinse, it is a redistribution. Water for the starch on Tuesday, water to sluice the floor at the end. 100 gallons is 1,000 pounds of water, half a ton, moved by hand, in 40-pound installments, before and between and after every other task of the day. Nobody writes that down in a household manual. The manuals discuss the temperature of the water and the quality of the soap and the correct order of the operations, and they assume the water is simply there, in the way that they assume the floor is there. It is there because a woman put it there, 20 pounds in each hand, 25 times over, in the dark. And when the water has been used, it must go out again, which nobody thinks about either. Dirty wash water, greasy and grey and lukewarm, must be carried to the drain in the yard. And it is exactly as heavy on the way out as it was on the way in. And it is more awkward because it slops. This is the reason a laundress's day has the shape it has. Not because washing takes so long in itself, but because the water has to be assembled first and disassembled afterward, and the fire has to be brought up under it, and none of that can be hurried by wanting it hurried. The fire has taken now. You hear it before you see it, that low, steady draw in the flue, and you feed it coal from the scuttle a few lumps at a time, not a great heap, because a copper fire wants to be built and not smothered. Coal costs you around a shilling for 100 weight, if you buy it in a sack from the yard at the end of the street. More if you buy it in smaller amounts from the chandler, which you sometimes must in a bad week. And buying small is one of the several arrangements by which being poor is made more expensive than being comfortable. You empty the first cistern into the copper, bucket by bucket, and the water goes in cold and hits the warming iron with a sound like a long sigh. Then you wait, and you do not wait idly, because nobody in this trade has ever waited idly for anything. The bundles are stacked by the scullery door where the housemaids left them, and each one is knotted in a square of sheeting with a corner tucked through, and each one has a name on it in your daughter's handwriting, on a scrap of card, because you can read, but you write slowly, and she writes quickly. You untie the first and tip it out onto the flags. Now, sorting. Sorting looks like the least of it. Sorting looks like tidying. In fact, sorting is the single decision on which the entire week turns, because everything that happens after this point is applied to a group rather than an item. And if the wrong item is in the group, that item is ruined, and you pay for it out of a purse that has no room in it for paying for things. you are sorting along 3 lines at once and holding all 3 in your head together. First, color, whites to one side, and by whites you mean the things that can withstand boiling and a bleaching agent, and will be improved by both. The sheets, the pillow slips, the towels, the shirts, the body linen, the tablecloths, coloreds to another side entirely, where they will be washed in water no hotter than your hand can bear, quickly, and got out and dried fast, because a printed cotton left to sit in warm, soapy water will run, and a run color cannot be argued with afterward. Second, fabric. Linen and stout cotton can take the copper. Fine cotton can take it briefly. Wool cannot take it at all, and wool cannot take rubbing, and wool cannot take a sudden change of temperature in either direction, because wool that is shocked with heat and then agitated will felt itself into a stiff, small board of a thing that used to be a stocking. Silk you decline to wash at all if you can help it, and if you cannot help it, you handle it separately and privately and with a good deal of care. Third, and least pleasant, filth. Kitchen cloths and greasy aprons go into their own tub and stay there, because grease released into a tub of water will settle onto whatever else is in that water, and a sheet washed alongside a dripping cloth will come out looking clean, and wearing a faint film that will show itself the moment it is ironed. Similarly, the things from a household where somebody has been unwell go apart from everything else and get the longest boil and the strongest soda. And you do this because you have always done it, and because you have observed that it answers, which is a form of knowledge that runs a good many years ahead of anybody having explained to you why it answers. So you kneel on the flags with the candle guttering, and you sort by touch as much as by sight, because there is not enough light for sight, and your fingers know a linen sheet from a cotton one at the first contact, the way a baker's hands know dough. Whites here, coloreds there, woolens in the basket, kitchen things in the corner tub. Anything with a stain that wants treating on its own before it goes near heat, set aside on the bench, because heat sets a stain permanently, and the entire art of removing marks consists of doing it before the copper ever sees the cloth. By the time the last bundle is down, the ceiling has begun to change. There is steam coming off the copper now, thin at first and then thicker, rolling out and finding the low beams and hanging there in a flat layer. And the room warms so fast that within a quarter of an hour you have your sleeves pushed above the elbow, and there is condensation running down the whitewashed wall in slow lines. The smell arrives with it. Hot iron, wet stone, the faint, sharp edge of soda from last week that never entirely leaves the room. Outside, the court is still dark and silent. Inside, in a low back kitchen in a suburb of London, at 5:30 on a Monday morning in 1878, the water has come to heat. The linen is in its heaps by colour and cloth and condition, and the day, properly speaking, is about to begin. The soaking comes first, and the soaking is where the work is either won or lost. You take the whites, and you lower them into the long wooden tub set on trestles by the wall, and over them you pour water that is hot but not boiling, because water at a full boil poured onto a stain that has any blood or any egg or any milk in it will fix that stain into the weave for good, and no amount of labour afterwards will lift it. Warm loosens, hot sets. That single distinction is the difference between a laundress people recommend to their neighbors and one they quietly stop sending to. And nobody has ever written it down for you. You learned it because you were 11 years old and you ruined a christening gown, and the woman you were working under told you exactly once, in words you have not forgotten, what you had just done and what it had cost her. Into the whites goes a handful of soda, dissolved first in a cup of hot water so it does not sit in a lump against the cloth. The water changes character the moment it takes the soda in. It goes soft and slightly slippery between your fingers, and it will now do things that plain water will not do, because the water that comes out of the standpipe in this part of London is hard, full of chalk from the ground it has travelled through, and hard water and soap fight each other rather than working together. Put soap into hard water, untreated, and it curdles. It makes a grey scum that floats on the surface and settles back onto the linen and leaves it dingy no matter how long you work it. So you soften the water first. Every laundress does. Not 1 in 20 could tell you the word for what the chalk is doing, but every one of them knows that a spoonful of soda in the tub is the difference between soap that lathers and soap that wastes. The coloureds go into their own tub, and the water for the coloureds is barely more than lukewarm. Dye in 1878 is an unreliable thing. A printed cotton from a good house may hold its colour through 50 washes. A cheap one from a market stall may let go of half its pattern the first time it meets warm water. And the danger is not only that the frock is ruined, but that the dye runs out into the tub and comes to rest on somebody else's white petticoat. And then you have destroyed 2 garments belonging to 2 different customers, and you will be paying for both. So coloureds are kept cool, kept separate, and kept short. They soak for less time than anything else in the room. And you keep half an eye on the water while they do, watching for the first faint tint of pink or blue rising off the cloth. If you see it, they come out immediately, and they get a handful of salt in the rinse afterwards, in the hope of holding what colour remains. The greasy things stand apart from both. Kitchen cloths, dish rubbers, the aprons that come back from a household where the cook is generous with the dripping. These get the harshest treatment, because grease is not dirt in the ordinary sense. Ordinary dirt sits on cloth and can be persuaded off it. Grease bonds to the fibre and will not be shifted by water alone, no matter how hot, because grease and water have no interest in one another whatsoever. What shifts grease is alkali, and what alkali does is convert the grease itself into a kind of soap right there in the tub, so that the very thing fouling the cloth becomes the agent that carries it away. That is the whole trick, and you perform it 3 or 4 times a week, without ever having heard it described in those terms. This is worth slowing down for, because the soap in your hands has a history that reaches directly into government finance. For most of the century, soap in Britain was taxed. Not lightly, either. The duty was heavy enough that soap makers had to keep their pans under the eye of an excise officer, who would put a lock on the vessel at the end of the working day, so that nothing could be boiled overnight without the revenue knowing about it. The tax made soap expensive in a way that fell hardest on exactly the households that needed most of it. And for a working family, It meant that soap was rationed carefully, shaved thin, and made to last. Then, in 1853, the duty was repealed. The price came down sharply and stayed down, and consumption across the country rose year after year for the rest of the century. You were a small child when that happened, so you have no memory of the old prices. But the older women in this trade do, and one of them told you once that when she started, soap was the single largest cost in a wash, and you counted the shavings. Now it is one cost among several, and you buy it by the bar without much thought, and you use more of it than her mother would have believed possible. It is a quiet illustration of something that is easy to miss about the Victorian household, which is that a great many of the changes that altered women's work most profoundly were not inventions at all. They were tax decisions made by men who would never touch a wash tub that arrived in the back kitchen years later disguised as ordinary domestic fact. There are 2 soaps in this room, and they do different jobs. The hard yellow soap comes as a long bar, dense, faintly translucent at the edges, smelling of tallow and resin, and it is cut with a knife into shavings, so that it dissolves rather than sitting sullenly in the water. Yellow soap does the heavy work. It goes into the copper with the whites, and it goes onto the washboard for anything that needs rubbing. The soft soap is a different creature, a brownish jelly sold by weight out of a tub at the oil and colour shop, and it is more alkaline, more aggressive, and used where you want something that will bite. It goes on the greasy things. It goes on cuffs and collars where the mark of a neck has worked itself into the weave. You use it sparingly on anything fine, because what makes it effective on grease also makes it capable of taking the life out of good linen if you leave it sitting. And then the other jars on the shelf, which is where the real craft of the trade lives. Washing soda, which you have already used. In the blue paper it comes wrapped in. Borax, which is gentler, will soften water without the harshness of soda, and which you keep for the finer whites, and for anything belonging to a customer who complains about their linen wearing thin. A bottle of turpentine for paint and tar, used out of doors because of the smell. Ox gall, bought from the butcher, unpleasant to handle, and extraordinarily effective on grease in coloured cloth, where soda would strip the dye. Lemon and salt for rust marks. Milk, of all things, for ink, drawn through the cloth again and again until it runs clear. Fuller's earth made into a paste for grease on wool. Not one of these came to you from a book. You cannot read well enough to work through the household manuals that middle-class mistresses buy and set on their kitchen shelves. And even if you could, you would find that a good deal of what is printed in them is wrong, copied from an earlier book by a writer who never tested it. What you have instead is a body of knowledge passed hand to hand between women, tested on real cloth belonging to real customers who would not pay for failure, corrected constantly by consequence. It is chemistry. It is simply chemistry that has never been written up, performed by practitioners who are not permitted the word. You cut the soap now, drawing the knife along the bar so the shavings curl and drop into the tub, and the water takes them and goes cloudy. Your hands are already wet and already cold at the fingertips, despite the heat in the room, and there are cracks across the knuckles that opened in November and have not closed since, Soda water finds every one of them. It stings in a way you have stopped remarking on. The way a person stops remarking on the sound of a road outside their window. In the evenings, you rub in a little mutton fat, and it helps for a few hours. By the following midday, the water has taken it off again. The soaking that is happening now is not, in truth, the first soaking. The first was done last night, because a Monday wash does not begin on Monday. On Sunday evening, with the church bells gone quiet, and the court settling, and the whole of respectable London at rest, you were on your knees in this same room, filling this same tub, putting the worst of the linen down into cold water with a scattering of soda, so that it could stand overnight, and let the water do slowly and for nothing what you would otherwise have to do quickly and with your arms. 12 hours of cold soaking will lift out more dirt than an hour of hard rubbing, and it costs you nothing but the water and the not resting. So Sunday is a day of rest, in the sense that you do not go out and you do not take in new bundles. It is not a day of rest in the sense of stopping. You lift a corner of one of those overnight sheets now, and look at the water it has been lying in. It is grey, faintly, with a scum riding on the surface, and that greyness is a full day of a household's living lifted out of the cloth before the fire was even lit. It is a satisfying thing to see, in the way that a swept floor is satisfying. You tip the tub, carry it to the door, and send the water out across the flags of the yard, where it steams for a moment in the cold and runs off toward the gully. Then you come back in, and you fill the tub again, and the real work of the morning starts. The window over the sink has gone from black to a kind of bruised grey, which is not daylight, but the promise of it. There is no sun yet. There will not be sun for another hour and more, and by the time it comes, you will already have washed enough linen to fill a bed. This is one of the small facts of the trade that nobody puts in the picture books. The hardest hours of a laundress's week happen in the dark by candle and firelight, before the rest of the street has stirred. The tub stands in the middle of the floor on 3 bricks to bring it to a workable height. It is a wooden tub, staved and hooped like a small barrel, cut down, about 2 feet across at the mouth, and it has been in this room longer than you have. Into it goes the first load of the day. The coarse whites, the sheets and bolster cases, and the plain shifts, lifted dripping from the soak, and dropped in with a hot suds poured over them from the copper. Steam comes up at once, and fogs the window, and makes the candle flame look furred. Then you take up the dolly. If you have never seen one, it looks like something between a stool and a weapon, a wooden shaft the length of a broom handle, with a crosspiece at the top for 2 hands, and at the bottom a round block of wood with 4 or 5 short legs projecting downward, like a milking stool that has been set on the end of a stick. You grip the crosspiece, you plunge the legs down into the cloth, and you twist. Down, twist one way. Lift. Down, twist the other way. The legs drive water violently through the weave and drag the fabric against itself. And it is that friction, cloth on cloth, that does the cleaning. Not the soap alone, not the heat alone. The mechanical punishment of fibers rubbing against fibers in hot alkaline water is what lifts dirt out of linen. And every method of washing invented since, including the machine humming in a kitchen tonight, is an attempt to reproduce that one action with less human shoulder behind it. You do it perhaps 200 times for a tub. Then you rest a moment. Then you do it again. The noise it makes, carries, that is worth knowing, because it tells you something about how the whole neighborhood keeps time. The thump and slosh of a dolly in a wooden tub travels through a party wall and across a yard. And on a Monday morning, in a court of small houses, there is not one of them going, but 6 or 8, all slightly out of step with one another. And the effect is a kind of loose, irregular drumming that starts before dawn and does not properly stop until the middle of the afternoon. Add to that the scrape of washboards, the clang of a copper lid, women calling across for the loan of a peg or a scrap of blue, and a child crying somewhere, because a child is always crying somewhere. That is the sound of Monday. In a working district, it was as reliable as church bells, and people who grew up in such a court remembered it all their lives, the way you remember a smell. For the things too delicate or too small for the dolly, there is the board. It leans against the inside of a second tub, ribbed, worn smooth in the middle, where 20 years of knuckles have polished it. Collars, cuffs, handkerchiefs, the cotton stockings, anything with a stain that needs looking at directly. You take up the piece, you soap it, you press it against the ribs, and you rub with the heels of your hands, short and hard, turning the cloth to work a fresh part against the wood. Your knuckles catch the ribs. They will catch them 100 times before noon. This is the origin of a phrase that has outlived its object entirely. To say a woman has had it hard, to say she has been through the ringer, to say she is worn to the bone. The bone in question was the knuckle bone, and the board was where it wore. Here is something the picture book version leaves out, and it is the part that most deserves attention. Everything about this work is a matter of judgment, and the judgment is held in the hands rather than in any book. Consider the water. A wash that is too cool will not release the grease. A wash that is too hot will set a stain permanently. And there are stains, the protein ones especially, that cold water lifts easily and hot water fixes into the cloth for good. There is no thermometer in this room. There has never been a thermometer in this room. You judge temperature by putting a hand into the tub and holding it there. And the difference between water you can bear for a count of 3 and water you can bear for a count of 6 is the difference between a clean sheet and a ruined one. That calibration lives in the nerve endings of a woman's palm and is acquired over years and cannot be transmitted by telling. Your daughter is acquiring it now, slowly, by putting her hand in after yours and being told yes or no. Consider the fabric. A linen sheet will take punishment that would destroy a printed cotton. A woolen flannel must never go near the boiling copper, or it will come out felted, shrunken, hard as a board, and no apology will restore it. Silk must be washed in tepid water with no soda at all, and dried away from the fire. A coloured print may run, and whether it runs depends on the dye, and whether the dye will run depends on things you can only learn by having ruined something once. You know, by sight and by feel between finger and thumb, perhaps 40 different kinds of cloth, and what each of them will tolerate. That is not unskilled work. It is a body of practical knowledge, as specific as a cabinet maker's knowledge of timber. And it was never written down, and never certificated, and never paid as skill, because the woman holding it was not thought of as holding anything at all. And consider what the work does to a body. The dolly, loaded with wet cloth, resists at every stroke. Lifting sodden sheets from a tub is dead weight, and a wet sheet is a surprising thing, 4 or 5 times heavier than the dry one. Over years, this builds a particular physique in laundresses, and observers of the period remarked on it. Heavy forearms, thick wrists, broad shoulders, strong hands. Photographs of laundresses show women who look as though they could lift a man. They could. There was no other outcome available to a person who spent 30 years doing this. Across the room, your eldest has the smaller tub. She is at the age where she has more willingness than reach, and she works the little dolly with her whole body rather than her arms, rising on her toes to get weight over the shaft. You have given her the pillowcases and the towels, the things that are hard to spoil. Half of what she is doing is not the washing. It is the watching she sees when you sniff at the copper, when you pull a sheet out to look at it against the candle, when you set something aside for a second soak rather than pushing it through. In 10 years, she will do those things without being able to say why. And she will have learned them here, in the dark, at 7 years old, standing on her toes. It is worth stepping across town for a moment, because the same task, done on the same morning, looked entirely different 2 miles away. In a large country house, or a substantial townhouse with grounds, laundry did not happen in the kitchen. It happened in a laundry, a purpose-built range of rooms, often detached from the house because of the steam and the smell, with a stone or tiled floor sloped to a drain. A wash-house with fixed coppers set in brick and piped water. A separate drying room heated by flues. And an ironing room with a long deal table and a stove built to hold a dozen irons at once. There would be a head laundry maid, 1 or 2 under laundry maids, and often a woman brought in from the village by the day for the rough work. The head laundry maid in such a house might earn something between 18 and 28 pounds a year, with all her board and lodging found, which put her among the better paid of the women servants, above a housemaid, and often above a cook's assistant, precisely because the work took skill and the fine linen was valuable. The equipment differed as much as the staffing. Purpose-built laundries had proper wringers with rubber rollers, box mangles the size of a pony trap, drying frames on runners that slid into a heated closet on rails, sinks with taps. The maids there worked hard, and nobody who has lifted a boiled sheet with a copper stick would call it a soft place. But they worked with hot water arriving through a pipe and cold water arriving through another, on a floor built to be wet, in a room built to be steamed, with 3 pairs of hands to a task, and a whole Wednesday allotted to it, as though it were a normal part of the week. You have 1 room, 1 copper, 1 tub, 1 child, and the same quantity of linen for 6 households. The difference is not effort, and it is not skill. On the second point, you would very likely beat the head laundry maid, because she has never had to save a customer's shirt with nothing but soda and patience, and you have. The difference is capital. She stands inside a building somebody spent money to make suitable for this work. You stand in a back kitchen, making it suitable each Monday morning with bricks and a stick and your own arms. You put the dolly down for a moment, flex your fingers, and look at the window, which has gone from bruised grey to plain grey. The sheets in the tub have begun to look like themselves again. Behind you, the copper has come to a rolling boil, and it is time to move them into it. The copper stick is a length of smoothed wood about as long as your arm, and a half, worn pale at one end and darkened at the other, and it is the single most used tool in the room. You lift a sheet out of the tub with it, letting the water run back for a slow count, so you are not carrying more weight than you need. And you walk the 3 steps to the copper, with your shoulder braced, and your face turned slightly away from the steam. Then you feed the sheet in, coiling it round the stick, and pushing it under. Because a sheet dropped in whole will float in a great grey dome and trap air beneath it, and boil unevenly on top, while the underside sits cool. You put in 4 sheets, then the pillow covers, then the shirts. Not all at once. The copper holds what it holds, and the water must be able to move. A crammed copper boils badly, and badly boiled linen comes out with a faint yellow bloom in the folds that no amount of talking will explain away to a woman who is paying you to make her linen white. The steam comes up in a solid column, hits the low ceiling, spreads, and comes down the walls as water. Within 10 minutes, the window is running. Within 20, the plaster above the copper is dark and soft to the touch, as it has been dark and soft every Monday since you moved in. You have long since stopped noticing the taste of it in the back of your throat. Here is something worth slowing down for, because it explains why you do this at all. Nobody has told you about bacteria. In this year, the germ theory of disease is still being argued over in lecture rooms and medical journals, and a great many respectable doctors remain unpersuaded. Miasma, bad air, foul vapors rising from drains and marshes. That is still the working explanation for a good deal of illness in a good deal of the country. Nobody has come to your kitchen to inform you that sustained heat destroys the organisms that cause disease. And yet you boil, and everybody in the trade boils. And the reason given is that boiling gets things clean, which is true, and that it kills whatever is in them, which is also true, though the word used for whatever is in them varies. The practice arrived at the right answer by 3 or 4 centuries of watching what happened. Linen that was boiled kept better. Households that boiled their bedding had less trouble with the sort of small, crawling misery that follows dirty bedding around. Nurses in fever wards boiled everything long before anyone could tell them precisely why it worked. The knowledge lived in the hands, passed from a woman to her daughter as a rule about time and heat, without the theory underneath it. When the theory finally arrived and was accepted, it did not change what laundresses did. It only explained it. So you boil for half an hour, sometimes longer, for the heaviest whites, and you keep the fire steady underneath, and you stir with the stick every few minutes, so no part of a sheet sits pressed against the hot metal, because linen scorches against a copper wall as readily as it scorches under an iron. When you judge it done, you lift each piece out, dripping and impossibly heavy, and swing it across into the first rinse tub, and the water in that tub goes cloudy grey in a single second. Now comes the part of the day that would look to anyone watching from the doorway like superstition. You take down from the shelf a small cloth bag about the size of a walnut, tied at the neck with string. Inside, it is a blue powder. You have used the same brand for years. A bag of Reckitt's, though there are others, and there is a version sold as a squat little cube and a version sold as a ball, and all of them do the same thing. You cost them at something under a penny a bag, and one bag will see you through a good many washings if you are careful with it, and do not let it sit wet on the shelf. You swirl the bag through the last rinse water until the water turns a pale, faintly milky blue, and then you put the white linen into it. You are making white cloth blue in order to make it look whiter. Stated flatly, it sounds like nonsense. It is not nonsense, and the reason is a piece of practical optics that laundresses understood in their hands long before anyone put it in a manual in those terms. Linen and cotton, with age and washing and sunlight and the sulphur in coal smoke, do not go grey. They go yellow. A yellowed white sheet, held next to a new one, looks tired and dingy and a little unclean, even when it is perfectly clean. And yellow is exactly what a faint blue cancels. Add a whisper of blue to a yellowed cloth, and the eye stops seeing yellow and starts seeing white, or something the eye is quite happy to call white. Add too much, and you have a sheet that is visibly blue, and a customer who wants to know what you have done to her bedding. The whole craft is in the word faint. There is no measure for it. There is a color you learn to see in the water, and a length of time you learn to count in your head. And after that, there is what the cloth looks like when you lift it wet, which is not what it will look like dry, because it will dry lighter. So you are judging a color that does not exist yet. You dip a pillow cover. You hold it under with the stick for a count of 5 or 6, moving it so the water goes right through the folds, because blue that settles unevenly leaves streaks, and a streaked pillow cover is a pillow cover you have to wash again for nothing. You lift it. You look at it against the grey window light. You put it aside and take the next. There is one mistake you have made in your working life that you still remember, and it involved a nightgown left in the blue while you went out to see to a child in the yard. It came out with a distinct wash of colour across one shoulder. Unmistakable, not a shade anybody could argue about. You rinsed it 4 times and got most of it out, and it went back only a little tired looking. And the woman it belonged to never said a word, and you did not sleep well that Sunday. That is the size of the margin you are working in. A minute of inattention against a garment that might cost more than a week's earnings to replace, which brings you to the other whitening method, the older one, the one your mother relied on more than you do. Sunlight bleaches. Wet linen laid flat on grass, in sun, will lighten over hours in a way that nothing in a tub will match, and the effect is stronger if the cloth is kept damp, which is why the old practice was to lay it out and sprinkle it through the day. Whole industries were built on this. In the previous century, there were bleaching fields outside every cloth-producing town. Acres of grass covered in white cloth pegged down, and the linen might lie there for weeks, in a slow cycle of souring and washing and sunning. It was the single largest bottleneck in cloth production in these islands, and the reason a good linen sheet was an item of real household wealth passed between generations. You do not have a field. You have a yard the size of a small room, half of it in shadow all morning, and you share the line in it. What you have instead of sunlight is chemistry, and chemistry is faster and considerably less forgiving, Chloride of lime is what did away with the bleaching fields, and it comes to you as a coarse white powder that smells sharply of a swimming bath, and you keep it in a stoppered jar on the highest shelf. It is astonishing stuff. A weak solution will take a stain out of white cotton in minutes that no soap on earth will shift. It will take out fruit, ink, mildew, the brown ghost of an old iron mark. It will also, if you are careless, take the strength out of the cloth entirely. And this is the part that is not obvious, because the damage does not announce itself. A garment over-bleached comes out looking magnificent. It looks better than it has looked in years. Then it is washed twice more, and the fibers, which have been quietly eaten, give way, and a sheet tears along a fold, or a shirt goes at the shoulder seam. And it does so in the customer's house, weeks later, and the customer knows perfectly well whose hands it passed through. So the rule you keep is a rule about weakness and time. The solution is made far weaker than you think it needs to be, used cold, used only on white cotton and linen, and never on wool or silk or anything with a printed color, applied to the mark rather than the garment where that is possible, and rinsed out immediately and thoroughly, twice, because chloride of lime left in the cloth carries on working long after you have hung it out. You keep it away from anything with a metal button. You keep it away from your daughter, and she knows the jar on the top shelf is not one she opens. And if a thing is ruined, you replace it. There is no arbitration, no contract, no insurance in this trade. If a customer's shirt comes back whole, you pay for the shirt, either in money or in a great many washings done free. And you do it promptly and without argument, because the alternative is that 6 households hear you are careless, and by the end of the month you have 4. A decent man's shirt runs to several shillings. Fine linen sheets run to considerably more. A single mistake can take a week's earnings, and a reputation for mistakes takes everything. You lift the last of the whites out of the blue, and even in this poor light, standing in a room half full of steam with your sleeves pinned and your arms raw to the elbow, you can see they have come up beautifully. You allow yourself a moment on that, because it is nearly the only wage this part of the work pays. Then you push the tub aside with your knee and start the rinsing. Rinsing is the part of the work that nobody outside the trade ever thinks about, and it is the part that separates a laundress from a woman who merely washes. 3 rinses, not 1, not 2, and on a heavily soaped white load, sometimes 4. The first rinse is warm, drawn off the copper and let down with cold from the butt, and it carries away most of the soap that is still held in the fibers. The second is cooler. The third is cold, straight and clean, and by that point, the water should come off the cloth clear enough to drink, though you would not. And if it does not come off clear, you rinse again and lose another 20 minutes you had not planned to lose. Here is the thing most people misunderstand about soap. Soap does not simply lift dirt out and float away with it. Soap holds dirt in suspension in the water, and if you leave soapy water in the cloth to dry, the dirt dries back into the cloth with it. Worse, soap left in linen turns yellow within weeks, sets hard in the weave, and makes the next wash harder than the last. A shirt that has been badly rinsed for a year is grey in a way no amount of boiling will lift. Customers do not know this. They only know that the shirts they get back from one woman stay white for yours, and the shirts they get back from another go dull by autumn, and they change laundress and cannot tell you exactly why. So you rinse 3 times, and each rinse means lifting a full load of wet linen out of one tub and into another. And wet linen weighs a great deal more than dry. A single cotton sheet dry weighs perhaps 1.5 pounds. Wet through, before wringing, it weighs 5 or 6. A pair of heavy calico sheets, a bolster case, 4 shirts and a tablecloth all together in a tub of water is something close to 40 pounds of sodden fabric, and you must raise it clear of the water, let it drain, and carry it 1.5 steps sideways without dropping it on the flags. And you must do this 3 times for every tub of every wash day, for as long as you can do it at all. You lift with your back straight and your knees bent, not because anyone taught you the principle, but because you learned within your first year which way of lifting leaves you able to stand up on Tuesday. Between the rinses comes the wringing, and wringing is the reason laundresses are known by their forearms. You take a sheet at one end, the woman next door takes it at the other, and you twist in opposite directions, walking your hands along, drawing the cloth into a thick rope that shortens and hardens as the water leaves it. The water comes out in a long grey ribbon, and then in a spatter, and then in drips. When the rope will not twist any further, you shake it out, fold it, and twist it the other way, and it always gives a little more. 2 women can wring a double sheet nearly dry between them in under 2 minutes. 1 woman alone can do it, by looping the sheet over a hook set into the wall and twisting against that. But it takes twice as long, and it costs the shoulder something it does not give back. This is why the yard matters. This is why the arrangement with the woman next door is not simply neighborliness, but an economic partnership neither of you has ever written down. She rings with you on Monday. You ring with her on Tuesday. Neither of you counts, and neither of you would dream of asking the other for money. And if one of you moved away, the other's earnings would drop by something like 1/5 within a fortnight, which brings us to the mangle, because the mangle is what a laundress buys instead of a second pair of hands. Understand first what the older machine was. The box mangle, which your mother's generation used, and which still sits in a few of the bigger houses, was an enormous thing. A wooden box, 6 or 7 feet long, filled with stones and weighing perhaps 1 ton, riding on wooden rollers over a flat bed. You wound damp linen around the rollers, and then you turned a handle, and the loaded box travelled slowly across, and its weight pressed the water out and pressed the creases flat at the same time. It did the work of wringing and part of the work of ironing together, and on plain sheets and towels and tablecloths, it did it beautifully. It also cost more than a working family would see in a year, took up the floor space of a small room, and required real force to start moving. A woman who owned a box mangle rarely owned it to serve only her own household. She owned it as a business. That was the mangle woman, and every dense street in London had one. She kept the machine in her front room or her cellar, and neighbours brought their damp washing to her, and paid by the load or by the hour, 1 penny or 2 pence for a basket. And she took in a small, steady income without ever leaving the house. It was one of the few trades a woman with poor health or an injury could still work, because turning a crank at your own pace all day is a different order of labour from carrying water up an alley. Some of them made an honest living. some of them made rather a good one, because a mangle in a street with no other mangle is close to a monopoly, and the woman who owns it knows exactly what her neighbours can pay. The machine standing in the corner of your yard under its oilcloth is not that. It is the newer sort, the upright ringing mangle with two wooden rollers set in an iron frame, a heavy screw at the top to set the pressure, and a handle at the side. It stands about chest high, and it weighs perhaps 100 weight, which is why it stands where it does and will stand there until you leave these rooms. You feed a sheet in at the top, folded to a width the rollers will take, and turn the handle, and the rollers draw it through with a low groan and a rush of water into the tray beneath, and it comes out the other side, flat and pale and cool, and holding perhaps a quarter of the water it held going in. A sheet through the mangle twice is dry enough to go on the line, even in indifferent weather. A sheet wrung only by hand is not, and the difference between those two conditions in a London January is the difference between finishing a week's work and not finishing it. Now, the arithmetic, because the numbers here tell the whole story of the trade. That mangle, new from an ironmonger, cost somewhere between £2 and £3.10, depending on the size of the rollers and whether the frame was iron or wood. You did not pay that. You bought it second-hand from a woman giving up the work at £1.15, and you paid it off at 2 shillings a week over most of a year. And for that whole year, the payment came out first, before boots, before coal, before anything that was not rent or food. Against that, consider what the work pays. You charge by the dozen, as everyone does, and a plain dozen of household linen, washed and dried and delivered without starching or fine finishing, brings you around 9p. A dozen with the shirts starched and the collars properly got up brings 1 shilling and 3p. Sometimes 1 shilling and 6p from a household that wants it done particularly well and knows the difference. 6 households, and each of them sends between 2 and 4 dozen a week. Call it 20 dozen in a good week, mixed plain and fine. Call it something near 16 shillings taken in. Out of that comes soap, which is the great devourer. 3 or 4 pounds of hard yellow soap a week at around 4p the pound, plus soda, plus starch, plus blue, and you are already past 2 shillings before you have burned anything. Coal, to keep a copper going 2 full days, is another 2 shillings, and often more in winter, when you also want the room warm enough to dry indoors. Wear on the brushes, the boards, the line, the pegs, the endless replacement of things that live their whole lives soaking wet. So from 16 shillings taken, perhaps 11 or 12 stay. Rent takes 4 or 5. What remains feeds you and your daughter and whatever else there is of you. And it is not a great deal. And it is also more than a general servant earns in a comparable week, with none of a servant's board and lodging. And it is yours, and nobody sets your hours, or reads your letters, or turns you out because you have married. That is the bargain. That is precisely and entirely the bargain. And every woman in this trade has made it with her eyes open. The last rinse water has gone cold in the tub, and the light through the window has stopped pretending to be morning. Your hands are the colour of raw beef to the wrist, and the skin across your knuckles has split in 2 places, small and clean and stinging, the way it does every wash day from November to March, and never quite in summer. There is goose grease on the shelf for that, and you will use it tonight, and it will help by about as much as it usually does. You put the next sheet into the mangle rollers and lean into the handle. There is a load and a half still to go through, and the sensible thing, the thing your own good sense would tell any other woman doing this, is to leave the remainder soaking and finish it in the morning while you are fresh. You do not leave it. You have never once left it, partly because linen left soaking overnight in cooling water sours, and must be done again, which is a real reason, and the one you would give, but mostly because there is a hard, small pleasure in emptying a tub, in seeing the bottom of it, in reaching the end of a thing you said you would reach the end of. And you have very few pleasures in this week that arrive on schedule. So you turn the handle, and the water runs out of the cloth into the tray, and you keep going. By the time the last of the mangled sheets is folded into the basket, it is somewhere near 11 in the morning, and the light in the yard has changed. You carry the basket out on your hip, through the scullery door, over the 2 worn stones that serve as a step, and you stand for a moment in the open air, because the difference between the wash house and the yard is the difference between breathing and not. The yard is perhaps 12 feet by 20, paved in brick where it is paved at all, and it belongs to nobody in particular. 4 back doors open onto it. 3 lines cross it, and only one of them is yours by any arrangement you could defend in front of a magistrate. The other 2 are held by the woman next door, and by whoever gets to them first, which most weeks means the woman next door as well, since she is up as early as you are and has fewer children to step over on the way out. This morning she has already claimed the long line, the one that runs from the wall bracket to the post by the privy, the good one, the one that catches the sun for the 4 useful hours between 11 and 3. Her sheets are on it, 12 of them, hung doubled over the rope in the proper way, so the air moves through the fold, pegged at the corners and once more at the centre, so the wind cannot lift them off and drop them in the brick dust. You do not resent this. You have taken that line off her often enough. There is a rough justice in the yard, and it operates by rising early, and you both understand it, and neither of you has ever said a word about it aloud in 9 years. So you take the shorter line and the prop, and you begin. Hanging out is the only part of the day that anyone ever paints. It is the part where a woman stands with her arms up, and the cloth billows, and the whole business looks like something close to pleasure. And there is something in that, honestly. The air is cold and clean after the wash house. The weight comes off your back for a while. Your hands, which have been in water since 4, dry out and stop stinging quite so sharply. But it is not resting, and it is not simple. Every item goes up in a particular way, decided by what it is and what you need it to do. Sheets doubled and centre pegged, shirts by the tail. Never by the shoulder, because pegs at the shoulder leave a crease that no iron will remove, and a crease at the shoulder is the first thing a woman sees when her husband puts a shirt on. Stockings by the toe. Handkerchiefs by 2 corners with a gap between each one, because a handkerchief hung against another handkerchief will not dry. It will simply stay wet in the middle and go grey. Collars not hung at all, but laid on a rack, since a hanging collar dries out of shape, and a collar out of shape is worthless. You know all this in your hands, rather than in your head. Nobody taught it to you as a lesson. You learned it by ruining things when you were 9 years old and being told about it. The prop goes up under the center of the line, and the whole line lifts, and the sheets come clear of the ground and start to move. Now the part of this that nobody paints, everything you have done since 4 o'clock this morning is a wager on the sky. Consider what you have actually spent to get to this moment. Coal for the copper, roughly a shilling's worth across the day. Soap, another 7p or 8p. Soda, blue, a little starch made up ahead. Water carried, which cost nothing in money and a great deal in the shoulders. And 7 hours of your own labour, plus a fair part of your daughter's, none of which can be recovered, none of which can be put back in the box and used again next week. Against that you have a basket of wet linen and a sky. If the sky holds, you will have that linen dry and folded by 4 this afternoon, and tomorrow it will be starched and ironed, and on Thursday it will be delivered and paid for, and the whole arithmetic works out to a living. If the sky does not hold, none of that happens on schedule, and every day it slips is a day you are working without being paid for it, on materials you have already bought. That is the shape of the risk, and it is why every laundress in England is an amateur meteorologist, and rather a good one. You have been reading this particular patch of sky over these particular rooftops for 9 years. You know that if the smoke from the brewery chimney lies flat toward the east, the day will hold. You know that a certain kind of high white streaking means rain by evening, but not before, which is enough. You know that when the air goes suddenly soft and warm in February, it is not spring, it is weather coming in off the west, and you should take everything in at once and not argue with yourself about it. You are wrong perhaps 1 time in 6. 1 time in 6 is a very great deal better than nothing. A wet week is not an inconvenience. A wet week is a wage disappearing. When it rains for 3 days together, the work does not stop. It simply moves indoors, and indoors is 2 rooms in which you also cook, also eat, also sleep. The clothes horse comes out in front of the fire, and then the second one, and then lines are strung across the kitchen at head height, so that you spend the evening walking through damp sheets to reach the kettle. The fire that is drying the linen is a fire you are paying for in extra coal, on a day when nothing is coming in. The children sleep in a room where the air is wet. Everything smells faintly of cloth and smoke. You yourself sleep with a sheet hanging 18 inches above your face, and you have long stopped noticing it. And the linen that dries indoors, over a coal fire, in a small room, does not come out the way linen dries in the open air. It comes out with the smoke in it. It comes out flat and slightly grey, and lacking that particular sweetness that outdoor drying gives to cloth, which is a real thing and not a poetic one, and which your customers can detect without being able to name it. A woman who takes delivery of her sheets and finds them faintly smelling of the kitchen will not complain the first time. She will complain the 3rd time, or she will not complain at all and simply go to somebody else, which is worse, because at least a complaint can be answered. So in a wet week, you dry indoors, and you know the work is not as good, and you deliver it anyway, because the alternative is to deliver nothing. Some households, the grander ones, have solved this with money. A drying closet is a small heated room with slatted racks that pull out on runners, built next to the laundry, warmed by its own flue or by pipes running from the kitchen range. Wet linen goes in on the racks. The door is shut. And the heat and the movement of air take it dry in a few hours, regardless of what is happening outside. A house with a drying closet does not care about the weather at all. A drying closet costs a great deal to build and a steady supply of fuel to run, and it requires a house with a spare room to give up to it. And you have neither, and neither has any woman in this street. This is worth sitting with for a moment. The difference between a household that fears rain and a household that does not is not skill, and it is not effort. Your work is better than the work done in most of those closets. The difference is entirely a room and a flue and about £11. And that difference decides whether your income this week is a living or a loss. You are watching the sky over the rooftops now, and the sky is not being clear with you. There is high cloud in the west, thin, moving faster than the low air in the yard suggests it should be. That could mean nothing. It could mean a shower by 2 o'clock, which would be survivable, since you could get the sheets in and rehang them after. Or it could be the front edge of something that settles in and sits over London for 2 days, in which case everything on this line should be back in the basket within the hour, and the whole plan for the week rearranges itself around the fire. You stand with a peg in your teeth, and you work it out. This is a decision made twice a day, every day, for a working life, and it is never once made with adequate information. If you take the washing in unnecessarily, you have lost the sun and added hours to your week. If you leave it out and are wrong, you have 3/4 of a hundredweight of soaked linen to dry indoors, some of it possibly needing rinsing again if the rain comes down through the cold smoke, which in this city it very often does. You decide to leave it out and to stay near the door. That is the other thing the paintings leave out, incidentally. The rain is not the only enemy overhead. You are standing in a yard in a city that burns something in the neighborhood of 10 million tons of coal a year, and every fire in every grate, in every house, for a mile in each direction, is putting its share of soft black grit into the air above you. On a still day it comes down slowly and evenly, and it comes down on your clean white sheets. You have taken linen off a line at 4 in the afternoon that was faultless at 11 in the morning, and found it wearing a fine grey film that you could see when you laid it against fresh cloth. Not enough to be called dirty, enough to be called not quite white. And not quite white is precisely the thing you are being paid to prevent. So it goes back in the tub, and the whole afternoon is spent undoing what the air did to a morning's work. There is nothing to be done about it. You cannot argue with a city. You hang the last of the shirts by their tails, spaced properly, and you raise the prop another few inches so the line clears the wall, and the sheets fill and empty and fill again with the small, dull sound of wet cloth moving. It is past noon now, and you have not sat down since 4 in the morning. That is not a complaint, and it is not exaggeration for effect. It is simply the arithmetic of a wash day. You have knelt, and you have bent over the tub, and you have crouched at the copper, and you have stood at the line with your arms above your head. But you have not sat, because sitting on a Monday is a thing you do at 9:30 at night, when the last of it is hung, and there is nothing further that can usefully be done in the dark. Your dinner, such as it is, comes from the shelf by the window. Bread, cut thick and dripping, scraped from the basin and spread to the edges. The dripping is from Saturday's small piece of beef, and it has set with a layer of brown jelly at the bottom that is the best part and gets saved for the children. The tea has been on the hob since 11 and has gone the colour and roughly the strength of the water in the second rinse. You drink it very hot and very sweet, because sugar is cheap now in a way it was not when your mother was your age, and because sweet tea does something for a body that has been working since before light, that plain water does not. You eat standing, with your back against the doorframe, and one eye on the copper and the other on the yard. It takes perhaps 4 minutes. There is a piece of the crust left, and your youngest gets it. Consider what has actually been arranged here, because it is more deliberate than it looks. You are a married woman with children. That fact, in this year, closes most doors in the working world. You cannot go into service, because service means living in the house you serve, and no household in this city is going to take a housemaid who brings a husband and 3 children with her. You cannot easily go into a factory or a workshop, because the hours are fixed by somebody else and run from 6 in the morning to 6 at night, and there is nobody at home to mind a 4-year-old for 12 hours. You cannot take up a trade that requires an apprenticeship, because you did not serve one and are 20 years past the age when you might have. What is left to you is a very short list. You can take in sewing, which pays badly enough that the women who do it are the poorest women in the city. You can keep a small shop if you have capital, which you do not. You can take in lodgers if you have space, which you also do not. Or you can take in washing. Laundry, for all its weight and heat and ruin to the hands, has one enormous virtue over every other option available to you. And the virtue is this: it happens at your own door, on your own schedule, with your own children within sight of you the entire time. The tub does not care whether you stop for 10 minutes to settle a quarrel between 2 small people over a wooden spoon. The copper does not require you to explain yourself to a foreman. Nobody docks your wages for lateness, because there is nobody above you to do the docking. You set the hours. The hours happen to be brutal, and they are set largely by the water and the weather and the customers, rather than by any free choice of yours. But the point stands. You are, in a narrow and hard-won sense, working for yourself. This is why the trade is so overwhelmingly full of married women and widows and women with children, and why the census takers, when they come round and write down what people do, will put the word laundress against so many doors in streets like yours. In some of the poorer districts of this city, and in the towns where the great houses cluster, washing is the single most common paid occupation a married woman will name. Not because anyone wants it, because it is the one that fits around the rest of a woman's life, instead of demanding she abandon that life at the door. There is a price for the arrangement, and you pay it in the fact that your home is also your workplace. Your kitchen is a laundry. Your yard is a drying ground. The room your children sleep in has a horse of damp shirts standing in it 3 nights out of 7, from October to March. You cannot leave the job by walking away from it, because you would be walking away from the house. But you are here. And they are here. And on the ledger of what a woman in your position can actually arrange, that counts for a great deal. The yard, at present, contains all 3 of them. Your eldest is 11 and has the smallest of the rinse tubs to herself, working a pillowcase through the water with her sleeves pinned back, doing it properly, and knowing that she is doing it properly. She has the timing now. She knows how long a thing sits, and when it comes out, and how hard you may wring a cotton without setting a crease you will fight all Wednesday. She learned it the way you learned it, which is by standing next to a woman doing it and being handed the light end of the work until the light end was too easy. The middle one is 7 and is nominally helping, and is in fact carrying single pegs from the basket to the line 1 at a time, which is a system of her own devising, and which nobody has yet had the heart to correct. The youngest is 4, and is under the strictest standing order in the household, which is the order about the copper. That order gets repeated perhaps 30 times a day, and it does not get relaxed. The copper is full of water at a rolling boil. The fire under it is open, and the flags around it are frequently wet. Your eldest has one job that outranks every other job she has, and it is to know where the 4-year-old is at all times when the copper is going. She does know. She has known since she was 7 herself. She looks up from the rinse tub every minute or so, without appearing to think about it. The way you do, the way the woman next door does, the way every woman in this street who works with hot water and small children does. This is the ordinary, unremarked, unpaid vigilance that runs underneath everything else that happens here. It never appears in the accounts. It has no name in the trade. It is simply the second job you are doing. At every moment you are doing the first one, and you have been doing both simultaneously for 11 years without once being asked about it. The gate goes at about 1:30. It is the housemaid from the house in the terrace with the iron railings, and she has a bundle on her hip, and she is early. She is not due until Thursday, and this is Monday, and you know before she has crossed the yard that this is going to be a conversation about a favor. She is perhaps 19, and she is perfectly pleasant, and she is also entirely aware of the shape of the thing she is about to ask. Her mistress has people coming on Friday. There are 2 extra tablecloths, a dozen napkins, and 4 shirts belonging to a nephew who arrived without warning, and the whole of it is wanted finished by Thursday morning. And she is very sorry, and she knows it is not the usual arrangement. You wipe your hands, and you look in the bundle, because you never take a bundle without looking in it. Table linen is heavy, and the napkins have been used, and one of the cloths has a wine stain the size of a saucer that has been sitting for 2 days and has set into the weave, and the shirts have collars that will want proper starching and a careful iron. So you do the sum standing there in the yard with the steam coming out of the door behind you. That is another 3 hours of work at the least, most of it on Wednesday, which is already an ironing day and already full. It means candles in the evening. It means the wine stain treated separately. which means salts, which cost money and will take a second application. It means one of your other customers, most likely the one who is least particular, gets her sheets on Thursday afternoon instead of Thursday morning. You say that it can be done. You say it in the tone of a woman who is doing something slightly out of the ordinary, because it is. And because if you say yes too easily this Monday, it will be Monday again in 3 weeks with another basket. You mention the stain specifically, and you say what it will need. You do not make a speech about it. You simply name the thing so that when the cloth comes back clean, it is understood by both parties that clean was not automatic. And you name a price, 6pence over the usual for the extra bundle. And she nods, because she has been sent out with the authority to agree to something like that, and has probably been told a figure twice as high as the one you asked. There is no paper. There is no contract. There is nothing written down anywhere in the world that records that you have just agreed to work 3 additional hours this week for 6pence and the goodwill of a house in the terrace. What holds the arrangement together is your reputation, and your reputation is the only capital you own. It is worth more than the mangle. It consists of the fact that in 11 years you have not lost a garment, not once returned a shirt with a scorch on it, not once sent a thing back grey, and not once failed to appear on a Thursday morning. That is the whole of it. That is what a laundress trades on. It travels too, and it travels along exactly one road, which is the road between housemates. Girls in service talk to other girls in service at the area steps and in the street and at chapel on Sunday. And when a house needs a new washerwoman, the housemaid is very often the one asked to recommend somebody. Every one of your 6 households came to you that way. Not one came from an advertisement. Which is why you are unfailingly civil to a 19-year-old with a bundle on her hip, who has just made your Wednesday considerably worse. She goes, you carry the extra bundle in and set it apart from everything else so that it cannot possibly get mixed. And you go back to the tub, and the afternoon closes over you again. The wash is behind you now. Move forward to the second day, to the middle of Tuesday afternoon, when everything that came off the line, dry and stiff, has been brought in and stacked, and the room has changed its character entirely. This morning it was water. Now it is heat and starch and a kind of concentration that the washing never asked of you. Starch first, because nothing can be ironed until the starch has gone into it and dried again. And starch is made, not bought ready. You buy it as a lump or a powder, wheat starch mostly, sometimes rice. And what you do with it decides half of what a customer thinks of your work. There are 2 ways, and you use both, and the difference between them is the difference between a shirt front that gleams and a petticoat that merely holds its shape. Cold starch, or raw starch, is stirred into cold water until it is a thin milk, and the cloth is dipped and wrung and left to dry. It gives a hard, glassy finish, and it is what a gentleman's collar wants. Boiled starch is made by mixing the starch to a paste with a little cold water first, so it does not go to lumps, and then pouring boiling water over it while you stir, and it thickens and turns from white to a clear grey-blue as it cooks. That gives body rather than glass. Aprons, petticoats, cuffs on a morning dress, table linen. Into the boiled starch, if you have it, goes a small piece of candle wax, or a scrap of soap, or a little borax, which is the trick that keeps the iron from sticking and dragging. A laundress who does not know that trick will burn shirt fronts all her life and never quite understand why. Nobody taught you it out of a book. A woman in the next street told you 20 years ago, standing in a doorway, and you have used it every week since. You dip the collars and the cuffs, working them between your fingers, so the starch goes right into the weave and not just over the face of it, and you wring them out hard, and you hang them to dry stiff as paper. Then, in a little while, you will damp them down again with your hand and a bowl of water, roll them tight, and let them sit an hour so the moisture spreads even through the cloth. Ironing a collar that is wet in one corner and bone dry in the other is how you get a ripple you cannot press out. Here is a thing worth slowing down over, because it explains why this end of the trade pays and the washing does not. The detachable collar is barely 50 years old. Before it, a shirt was a single garment, and when the collar was dirty, the whole shirt was dirty, which meant a clerk with a fortnight's worth of clean appearance to maintain needed a fortnight's worth of shirts, which cost more than most clerks had. Somebody, and the story usually credits a woman in New York State, who was tired of washing her husband's shirts, cut the collar off, and made it a separate thing that buttons on. And an entire class of men who could not afford to look respectable suddenly could, which was very good for them, and which put the work squarely onto you. A city full of clerks and shopmen and junior masters now needed a clean, hard, white, precisely shaped collar every single day, and none of them could produce one. The collar is the smallest object in the whole basket, and it is the one that decides whether the wearer is taken seriously in a room. So it is the one that is paid for. You charge a penny apiece for collars, where you charge a shilling for a dozen ordinary items, and nobody argues, because the alternative is a man walking into an office with a limp fold under his chin. That is the shape of the trade. The heavy labor is worth almost nothing, and the fine finishing is worth a great deal, and the two are done by the same pair of hands in the same room on consecutive days, and only the second one is ever called skill. The irons live on the range, 4 or 5 of them, so that one is always coming to heat while another is in your hand. They are solid castings with the handle part of the same metal, which means the handle is exactly as hot as the base, and you hold them with a folded pad of thick cloth that you have made yourself and remade a dozen times. There are box irons too, hollow, with a slug of iron heated separately and dropped inside, and their advantage is that no soot from the fire ever touches the sole. For a white shirt front, you want the box iron. For a sheet, you do not care. Then the small ones, the ones that make the difference. A goffering iron, which is a slim heated rod on a stand for pressing frills into a series of even curves, little tally irons for the crimping on a cuff. A sleeve board, a polishing iron with a rounded, mirror-bright face that you run over a starched collar at the very end to bring up the shine, back and forth, harder than you would think, until the surface reflects the window. Heat is judged by hand, and this is the piece of the craft nobody outside the trade ever quite believes. You take the iron off the range, wipe the base on a cloth kept for the purpose, and hold it a few inches from your cheek. If it is too hot, you feel it as a slap at that distance, or you touch a wetted fingertip to the base, and listen. A dull hiss, and it is not ready. A sharp crack, and it is past ready, and must stand a minute. That single sound is the whole of your temperature gauge, and it is more reliable than most instruments a household of the period could buy. And you learned it before you were 12. Now the shirt front, and the room goes quiet, because your daughter has learned that this is not a moment for questions. You lay it over the padded board, damp and rolled and rested. You start at one edge and work in long, unbroken passes, keeping the iron moving, never letting it sit, because starch under a stationary iron scorches in about 4 seconds, and there is no undoing it. The cloth changes as you go, dull to bright, soft to rigid, and there is a particular sound it makes, a faint, crisp catching when the starch takes properly. You go over it twice. Then the polishing iron, short strokes, weight through your shoulder rather than your wrist, and the front comes up with a sheen on it like paper. You hold it to the window and turn it. No shadow, no ripple, no faint yellow bloom, where the iron sat a half-second too long. Then it goes on the airing rack, and you take the next one, and there are 9 more. A scorch is the thing you are guarding against, and it is worth being exact about why. A scorched shirt front cannot be mended, cannot be washed out, cannot be turned or hidden. The fiber is damaged. The mark is brown, and it is permanent, and it sits directly in the middle of the most visible 6 inches of a man's clothing. A shirt of decent quality costs somewhere between 3 and 5 shillings. You are paid for that household's entire weekly wash, perhaps 3 shillings and 6pence. So 1 moment of inattention on a Tuesday afternoon can take a week's earning, and a fortnight's earning with it. And there is no insurance, no allowance, no margin anywhere in the arrangement that absorbs it. You have scorched things. Not many, but not none. And the ones you have scorched, you remember better than the thousands you did not. There is an etiquette to it, and it is worth knowing, because the way you handle a ruined garment matters more to your custom than the ruin itself. You do not hide it. You do not fold it clever, so the mark sits inside, and hope the household does not notice until Friday. That is how a laundress is finished, because she will be found out, and then everything she has ever returned becomes suspect. What you do is take it out, put it on the top of the basket, where it will be the first thing seen, and say plainly to the housemaid at the steps that you have spoiled it, that the fault is yours, and that you will take the cost off the account. Then you take it off the account, and you say nothing further about it, and you do not explain about the fire drawing badly, or the child at your elbow, because a household does not want a laundress's reasons. It wants to know that when something goes wrong, the loss falls on you, and not on them. That is the whole bargain when you strip it back. You carry the risk. They carry none. And your reputation is built precisely out of the fact that you have accepted that arrangement without complaint several hundred times. The afternoon runs on. Collars, cuffs, shirt fronts. Then the easier work, the sheets folded in 4 and pressed in long sweeps. The pillow covers, the table linen with its creases put in deliberately, so it will lie flat in a drawer. Your daughter takes the plain things now, the towels and the kitchen cloths, where a mistake costs nothing. And you watch her hold the iron a shade too long and say nothing, because she felt it too, and corrected it herself, which is better than being told. The heat has built in the room until the window runs with it. Your face is scarlet. The small of your back has settled into a steady ache that will still be there tomorrow, and in front of you, on the rack, and over the chair backs, and along the line strung under the ceiling, are 40 or 50 white objects, hard and bright and exact, that came into this house 4 days ago, grey and limp and stinking. Nobody will look at any of them. That is the point of them. A collar that is noticed has failed. Thursday morning, and for the first time in 4 days, the copper stays cold. You are up at the usual hour anyway, because a body does not learn a new habit in 1 week. But the work in front of you now is a different kind entirely. It is counting. The basket sits open on the table, and beside it lies the book, and between the two of them you reconstruct what came in on Monday, and make certain that every article of it is going back out. This matters more than almost anything else you do. A laundress who scorches a shirt front has made an expensive mistake. A laundress who loses a shirt front has ended a relationship. Cloth was expensive in a way that is genuinely difficult to feel now, and the households you serve know to a single item what they sent you, because their own housemaid wrote it down before she carried it out of the door. A middle-class family kept lists. There were printed books sold for the purpose, ruled in columns, 1 line each for shirts, collars, nightdresses, chemises, drawers, sheets, pillow covers, towels, tablecloths, napkins, so that a mistress could open the page and see at a glance that 9 collars went and 8 came home. So you count, and then you count again, and then your daughter counts a 3rd time from the other end of the basket, calling the numbers to you while you follow them with your finger down the page. Twice a year, roughly, the counts do not match, and the missing article turns up behind the mangle, or under a tub, or once inside a folded sheet, where it had ridden through the entire week undiscovered. But you cannot know that in advance, and so the 3rd count happens every Thursday of every week, without exception, because the alternative is arriving at a back door and being short. The packing is its own craft. Everything goes in flat and in order, heaviest and least delicate at the bottom. Sheets and tablecloths, then the plainer body linen, then at the very top the collars and cuffs and shirt fronts, which are hard as pasteboard and will crack across if anything is set on them. A clean cloth over the whole, then the lid, and then the weight of it, which is considerable, because dry linen is light only when you are holding one piece. You take it on your hip, not on your back, and not in front of you, but balanced against the side of the body, with one arm curved over the top of it, which is how women carried heavy loads for as long as anyone can trace, and which distributes the mass onto the hip bone rather than the arm. You will walk perhaps 2 miles this morning, with the basket shifted from one side to the other every few 100 yards, and you will make the journey more than once, because there is no possible way to carry 6 households of laundry in a single trip. Here is something worth slowing down for, because it is not obvious. You know these families better than almost anyone alive who is not related to them, and you have never once been inside a room where they sit. Everything you know from their linen. You know which household has a member with a persistent cough, because you have handled the handkerchiefs. You know which one has a new baby, from the sudden appearance of small things. You know which one has begun to economize, because the sheets that used to come to you 3 at a time now come 2, and the worn one has been turned, cut down the center, and reseamed with the outer edges brought to the middle, which is what a careful housekeeper does to get another 2 years out of a sheet, and what a household with money simply does not bother to do. You know which one is expecting company from an unseasonal wash of table linen. You know which household is genuinely comfortable and which is stretching itself to look comfortable, and the difference lies almost entirely in the underclothing, which nobody sees. That is the real ladder, and it is written in cloth. A working woman might own 2 chemises, not 2 dozen, not 12, 2, one being worn and one being washed, and if the washing one is not dry, then the worn one goes back on. A woman of the comfortable middle class in this decade might own a dozen or 15, plus night dresses, plus petticoats in graduated weights for the season, plus drawers, plus camisoles, and the sheer number is the point. The number is what allows her to send a great quantity to the laundress at once, and still have plenty in the drawer. Abundance of underclothing is invisible from the street, and absolutely legible from where you stand. It is the truest single measure of a household's real position that exists in the period, better than the front door, better than the furniture, better than the clothes worn outside, because the outer clothes can be bought on credit and made to last and shown to advantage, while the drawer full of clean linen can only be filled by having genuinely enough money over time to fill it. And the fine work signals it twice over. Frills that must be goffered. Tucks, whitework embroidery on a night dress, which serves no purpose except to require somebody's skilled hand at the end of every wash. Every ornamental detail on a piece of underclothing is an announcement that this household can pay for labor on an object nobody will ever see. That is not decoration. That is arithmetic made pretty. You reach the first house a little after 8, not the front. It does not occur to you to consider the front. You go along the side and down the area, steps to the basement door, and you wait there, below the level of the pavement, while somebody comes. Above you, on the railings, the milk has already been taken in. If a member of the family passes on the steps above your head, they will not look down. And this is not exactly rudeness. It is a convention so total that it functions like a wall. The housemaid opens the door. She is perhaps 19. She is the person you actually deal with every week in every house on your round, and the relationship between you is one of the more complicated things in your working life. She is a servant, and you are not, which in one direction makes you the freer of the two, since you keep your own hours and your own hearth, and nobody can dismiss you from a place you live in. But she has a fixed wage, and her food, and a bed, and a roof that does not depend on the weather, and she is inside the household, which counts. Neither of you would trade. Both of you have thought about it. She brings out the book, and you bring out yours, and the two of you go down the list together at the door, and it takes about 4 minutes. 9 collars, 9 collars, 4 shirts, 4 shirts. She checks the fronts quickly and expertly, holding one up to the grey light of the area to see whether the gloss is even. She's not being unpleasant. It is her job, and if she passes a scorched shirt into the house, it becomes her fault and not yours. So she looks. You would look too. Then the new bundle, which is Monday's work sitting there already tied. And then the money, or more often, not the money. Which brings us to the part of this trade that nobody puts in the picture books. You are extending credit. You, with your 2 rented rooms and your second-hand mangle, are lending money to families considerably better off than you are. And you are doing it every single week. And you have no choice about it. The way it worked was this. Many households settled with the laundress quarterly, along with the other tradespeople, at the same time as the coal merchant and the butcher and the chandler. Quarter days came 4 times a year. So a household might take 13 weeks of your labor, your soap, your soda, your coal, your water, your daughter's hands and your own, and pay for the whole of it in one lump at the end of it. And that means for 13 weeks you have bought their soap and burned your coal and had nothing back. You cannot do that with all 6. Some pay weekly, at the door, in coin, and those are the customers you value more than you can easily explain. Some pay monthly. One pays quarterly, and that one is the largest and the most respectable and the most reluctant to be pressed. And the amount owing sits in your book like a stone. And when quarter day comes and goes, and the money does not, you have almost no way to make it come. You will not go to law over a sum that small. You cannot refuse the next week's washing without losing the custom permanently. And losing the custom means losing the whole of what is owed, as well as everything after it. So you ask mildly at the door of the housemaid, who has no authority over the household accounts whatsoever, and she says she will mention it, and sometimes she does. That is the entire mechanism of debt collection available to you. A mild word to another woman who also cannot pay you. Money in this arrangement flows uphill quietly and constantly, from the people with none to the people with plenty, in the form of unpaid weeks, and it was so ordinary that almost nobody at the time thought to remark on it. You take the empty basket back up the area steps and turn along the road towards the second house, and the morning has come up properly now, and you pass on the corner where the omnibus stops, a thing that has been there about a year, and that you look at every week without saying anything about it to anybody. It is a shop front, painted board, gold letters, plate glass. It advertises a steam laundry out at the edge of the town, with machinery, collecting and delivering by van. Prices by the dozen printed on a card in the window. You have read the card. The prices are not much below yours. The finish, by every account you have heard, is worse, and the machines are hard on cloth, and things come back with buttons broken off. For the moment, your customers stay, because the work is better and because they know you. But you can do arithmetic, and you have stood in a doorway on a Monday morning and heard what a steam engine sounds like, and you understand perfectly well that a machine that never gets tired and never has a child at its elbow and never has to carry water up a step is going to keep getting cheaper, year on year, for the rest of your working life. Within 30 years, the hand laundress will be a rarity, and within 50, she will be a memory. and the daughters of the women doing this work will be doing something else. You shift the basket to the other hip and walk on to the second house. The second house takes longer than the first, because the housemaid there is new and does not yet know that the count is done at the door and not afterwards, and you wait on the step while she carries the basket in and comes back out and asks you to wait again while she fetches someone who knows about the money. You do not mind. The sun has come round onto the front of the houses, and the step is warm, and the basket is empty, and there is nothing you can do to hurry any part of it. You stand with your hands folded in front of you, the way you have learned to stand, and you look at nothing in particular, and eventually a woman comes out with 2 shillings and 9pence, and a query about a pillowcase, and the query is settled, and you go on. There are 2 more houses after that, and then the walk back, which is a mile and a bit, and which you do with the empty basket riding easy on your hip, because an empty basket after a full one is very nearly a pleasure. It is past 4 when you turn into your own street. The yard, when you come through the gate, is quiet in a way it has not been since Sunday night. The lines are bare. The tubs are upturned against the wall to drain. The dolly stick leaning in the corner, with the wood gone pale and furred where your hands go. The copper is cold. You put your palm flat on the brickwork of it out of habit, the way you have put your palm there 400 times this year to judge the heat. And there is nothing there, only stone, the temperature of the afternoon. The whole yard smells of wet brick, and a little of soda, and under that, thinly, of the soap, and by tomorrow even that will have gone. Your neighbour's washing is out on her half of the line, because her week runs a day behind yours, and one of her sheets lifts and drops in the small wind coming over the wall. Inside, the fire wants making up. You make it up. The kettle goes on. Your eldest has the little ones fed already, bread and a scrape of dripping, and the end of the cold bacon. And she has done it without being asked, and without particularly wanting praise for it. And you give her some anyway, briefly, and she shrugs it off, the way girls of 13 do. You sit down. This is the first time you have sat down, properly, with your back against the back of a chair, since about 6:30 this morning, and the sensation of it is so distinct that it is almost a sound. You get your boots off. The left one has to be worked off, because the foot has swollen through the day, and when it comes free, you sit for a moment with both feet flat on the floorboards and do nothing at all. The ache has moved. In the morning, it was in the hands. Through the middle of the week, it lived in the small of the back, low down, where the bending happens. Tonight, it has gone up into the shoulders and settled there, in the flat muscle across the top of them, and down into the blades, which is where the carrying puts it. You know this ache the way you know your own handwriting. You could locate it on a drawing. Tomorrow morning, it will be worse for the first hour, and then it will loosen. And by the time you are lifting anything, it will have stopped being a thing you notice. You drink your tea. It is very strong and very sweet, because that is how tea is drunk when the body has been working, and you drink it hot enough that it hurts slightly, and it is the best 10 minutes of the day. Now, consider what this week actually was. You washed for 6 households. You handled, by the piece, something on the order of 300 separate items. sheets and shirts and shifts and towels and tablecloths and collars and stockings and pillow slips and dusters and aprons. You sorted every one of them by fibre, by colour, by degree of soiling, and by what it could be expected to survive. And you got those judgments right, because if you had got them wrong, there would be a ruined thing sitting on your table tonight, and a conversation you did not want to have. You judged water heat with the back of your hand, and got it right. You judged soap. You judged when linen had boiled long enough, and when it had boiled too long. You mixed blue by eye in cold water to a strength you have never measured and could not write down. And you dipped for the count you have kept in your head since you were 15. And nothing came back grey, and nothing came back streaked. You made starch and got the body of it right for 4 different collars belonging to 4 different men with 4 different opinions about how a collar should stand. You heated irons to 3 distinct temperatures without a thermometer, and used them in the right order on the right cloth, and scorched nothing. You did all of that while keeping 4 children out of a fire and a copper of near-boiling water, while running an account book in your head, while extending credit to people better off than you, while managing your own reputation, which is the only security you have, and while carrying, at a conservative estimate, several hundredweight of water across a yard. And you earned, this week, a little over 14 shillings, clear, after soap and soda and blue and coal and the mangle money. Both of those things are true, and they sit next to each other, and they do not resolve. Because here is the part that matters, and it is not a simple part. The skill is real. It is not a pleasant thing said afterwards to make the labour sound better than it was. It is a genuine body of technical knowledge, held largely by women, transmitted almost entirely by hand, and by watching, covering practical chemistry, textile behaviour, heat management, water management, and timing, and it took years to acquire, and it could not be faked. A woman who did not have it ruined things. You have it. Your daughter is getting it now at the small tub, by standing where she can see your hands. The independence is real too, and it is worth saying plainly. This work is done in your own yard, on your own hours, in your own order. Nobody stands over you. Nobody rings a bell for you. You are not living in somebody else's attic and asking permission to go out on a Sunday. You chose your customers, and you can, if it comes to it, refuse one. For a married woman with young children in this century, that is a narrow and hard-won kind of freedom. And there are not many trades that offer it. And you know exactly what you would be giving up if you gave it up. And also, none of it counts. There is no title for what you are. No apprenticeship, no indenture, no certificate, no society, no examination, no name for the grades of your skill. Nobody will ever write down that you were good at it, and you are good at it. The census will call you a laundress, or possibly a washerwoman, and it will make no distinction between you and a woman who has been doing it badly for 3 months. If you are ill for a fortnight, there is no fund and no sick pay, and the 6 households will simply find somebody else, and when you are well again, some of them will not come back. If your husband dies, you will do this same work with less help and no second income. If your hands finally fail you, and hands do fail, there is nothing at all. And the work itself is designed to disappear. That is nearly the whole point of it. A shirt front done well does not announce that anyone labored over it. It announces that the man wearing it is a man whose shirts are simply, naturally, white. The better you are, the less visible the work becomes. The clean thing carries no signature. This is why the trade left almost no record of itself. It happened in backyards, in kitchens, in the hours before other people were awake, performed by women who were not writing memoirs, on objects that were then worn once and sent back to be done again. So the disappearance is not an accident of history. It is the product working exactly as intended, none of which is a complaint against anyone in particular. The housemaid at the second house did not build the arrangement, nor did the woman who came out with the 2 shillings and 9pence and the query about a pillowcase. It is simply the shape of the thing, and the shape is that an enormous quantity of expert labour was carried out by women and then subtracted from the account, and everybody involved treated the subtraction as ordinary, because it was ordinary, because it was everywhere. You have finished the tea. There is tomorrow to think about, which is Friday, which is the day you catch up the small jobs and mend what needs mending and put the yard in order. And then Saturday, and then Sunday, when the bundles come in again in the evening, and the soak tubs go on, and it all begins. You get up. You bank the fire, raking the ash forward and setting the last of the coal at the back, so there will be something living in the morning. You put the boots by the hearth, with the swollen left one on its side to dry. You send the little ones up. You stand for a second with your hand on the back of the chair, because standing up after sitting down is now the hardest thing you have done all evening. And then you go to the door to bolt it. And before you do, you look out. Your neighbour's line is still out, forgotten, or left deliberately for the night air, and the last of the light has gone from the yard, but not quite from the sky above the roofs. The sheets are grey now rather than white. They lift and fall and lift again, slowly, in the small wind coming over the wall, the way they have every night of every week, above the cold copper and the upturned tubs and the pale, worn handle of the dolly stick, and nobody at all is watching them but you.